Morning. All right. Oh, Collier's here. Let's let her in. Turn this off. Morning, everybody. Well, everybody, there's three of us here so far. If I keep clicking around, then I'll keep people keep pinging up as we kind of go through. I'm hoping that this is going to act as a revision session for the stuff that you've done already. I know that lots of you attended the original sessions that Miss Charlton ran on this. As I've said in class before, this isn't really about teaching you anything new, really. It's revision. I'm going to go through some of the points that I would have gone through, a couple of things for you to kind of think about, hopefully either develop your understanding, make yourself feel a little bit better, because I think it's pretty straightforward in a lot of ways. The key to getting this is looking at the stereotype and what is going on there, and what Nagra's up to and what he wants you to understand. Once you get that, not only does it help you understand the whole thing, but it helps you to kind of look at some of the more subtle bits of it and look at alternative meanings. Like I say, it's not grandma sucking eggs. I expect that you'll have worked this out, but I'll run through some stuff and we'll take it from there. I'm going to share my screen in a second, just to kind of make sure everything's there. I can't see my waiting room, so if I look a bit vexed and I keep pinging in and out, this is me just still trying to get my head around this kind of stuff. So if I go to here, share screen, and I go here, you should start to see what I've done together. What I did was, rather than go from scratch, I've completely repurposed the lesson that I would have taught on this anyway, because I wanted to go through it and make sure that we've kind of got all the bits and bobs. So I'm going to start with a video clip here. I've muted you. Can you unmute yourselves, just out of interest? Eliana, just take your microphone off and say something for me.
Hi.
Excellent. Right, thank you. You can put it back on now if you want. So really, I want to check that my audio is working. So if I click on this, it should take us to a YouTube video. I'll send this round once we've done the session. Okay, so I'll pull this off. You don't know, goodness gracious me, it's really kind of it's really entertaining. What it does is it does exactly the same thing in a lot of ways that Nagra's up to here, in that he's using the British Asian stereotype or elements of it to kind of poke quite gentle fun at British Asians themselves, but also to kind of make quite a serious point. So let's see, because I know your microphones work, I can now ask you questions, which is excellent news. So, seeing as Eliana's works, Eliana, what stereotype of British Asians did you see in that clip? What do you think was kind of being made fun of?
I didn't see anything.
Did it not come up?
No.
Awesome. So you just sat there for 2 minutes while I've been laughing away at something that you can't see. Could you hear anything?
No.
Awesome. Right. Okay. So we'll skip around to the green question here. Essentially, it was a clip from YouTube from goodness gracious me about a man whose son had just got his A-level results, and it started off with him really impressed because he got 4 A's, and he found out he got a B, and it was sort of calling his son an idiot and really disappointed. And really what it was doing was kind of drawing attention to one aspect of the stereotype of British Asians that's to do with with work ethic and working all the time and constantly striving to be successful, even perhaps when that might seem extreme. And that was the comedy version of that. So if we kind of repurpose the green question from it, something to think about here is really what the stereotype is of the British Asian community. And this is always the thorny aspect of teaching this in lessons, because I think historically students have been a bit reluctant to kind of answer questions like this for fear of looking a little bit sort of racist, if you want. So what I'll do, and you'll have picked it up from the poem itself, if you'd not already kind of come across this as a stereotype already, was the sort of traditional, really sort of stereotypical view of British Asians is that they run a corner shop, that they have very, very tight family groups, that the shops are open all the time. Perhaps they're not the greatest shops. They're always in kind of like dodgy areas. They always sell like knockoff or out-of-date stuff. There's also a stereotype that's to do with things like arranged marriages and women and keeping that aspect of their community hidden. And I will come back to that because that's really, really relevant to what this poem is about. So the general elements of the stereotype are there, and you can see all of them in the poem that you've looked at. Right. So let's just kind of scoot forward a little bit. Right. So the key thing here to think about is you should have picked up on the stereotype. And I know that I fed back to you guys that are sat here today about looking at that stereotype and thinking about how it's used. And I suppose the key here is not identifying the stereotype. You really should have spotted that because you kind of hit over the head with it a little bit, even in how it's written. And I'll talk about the sort of phonetic aspect of that in a little while. But really the key here for you guys is to think about why. If we accept that stereotypes are born out of ignorance, really, and that they're created and applied to a community, they're not created by the community itself, then why would someone whose background is pretty much exactly this, then why would you choose to use that stereotype to kind of make your point about the community that you're from? It's an interesting one. It's a really interesting one. You're right there, Charlotte. You keep getting booted. So let's just have a look at this. I'm just checking my waiting room. See if I'm not going to be hanging about. No, that's fine. So here we go. So really, have one eye on the stereotype, not just what it is, but how it's being used. Right. I've put a little glossary on here. I'm guessing that you will have known many of these, and you might not have, and that you've probably had to go to Google or what have you to kind of pick up some answers here. But the donkey jacket bit at the bottom and the sari, the clothing that we'll look at the description of the why is particularly relevant in that you'll see just from those two things, even if you've never read the poem before, you've got a direct contrast here. You've got sari, which is a very traditional sort of piece of Indian clothing for women, which is essentially like long strips of material sort of wrapped around the body. And I've got an image to show you later on to make it a little bit clearer. And next to that, you've got almost completely the opposite with what's called a donkey jacket. It's quite an old-fashioned piece of clothing now. I don't really. The best way to describe it is it's almost like an overcoat that was worn almost exclusively by British labourers, by British workmen in the 70s, almost like not a duffel coat, like a suede type jacket. But the point is a very male item of clothing, and whereas a sari is quite traditional, quite beautiful, quite sort of elegant and exotic, and has all kinds of positive connotations, even within the community that it's from. Donkey jacket's almost completely the opposite, very, very sort of informal, very working class, very sort of rugged piece of clothing for men. And when you start to just take that at the glossary and look at those as a pair, it starts to kind of highlight what he's actually doing with the stereotype of Asian women. Now, I said that I was going to address this. You will have noticed that it's written phonetically in parts, lots of V and that kind of stuff, and U as Y double O. And what he's doing here is combining the accent and the dialect at this point. If you had a chance to look at the videos that you got posted out as part of your invite here, you've got Nagra both reading the poem and kind of explaining a little bit about why that is. It's to give it a sense of authenticity, and he talks about how he's trying to almost reclaim that stereotype, that almost the stereotype that involves the very thick sort of Indian accent and the corner shop and all that is almost used as like an insult, as almost something that the members of that community are kind of pushed to feel embarrassed about, because it is the stereotype. But as he says, it's his background, and that's the sound of the people that he grew up with, the people that he's close to, of his parents, and they were shopkeepers. And what he's trying to do is kind of reclaim some of that, and that's kind of why he deals with the stereotype in the way that he does. Just so you're clear though, the accent and the dialect, the difference is on your screen now. Eliana, just confirm you can see this. I'm not just talking, you're not just looking at blank screen.
Yeah, I can see it.
Sweet, thank you. So accent is how things are said depending on where they're from. So if you know anybody from Barnsley, other than me, they might have a pretty strong accent, talk about where and where they're going type thing. And that's accent. That's words that everybody uses, but the accent means they can be pronounced in a very, very different way. And there's examples of that through Sing Song. Leave it to find your own. Dialect is to do with word choices. Depending on where you're from, you might choose different words. The example I was using in the lesson is Barnsley, Sheffield, parts of Rotherham and Doncaster. They're pretty much the only areas in the country where you can greet somebody by calling them cock. You know, hey up cock, how you doing? And everybody kind of goes, oh, you know, I'm all right. If you go to somewhere else in the country, their response to that is significantly different. So dialect is the effect where you're from has on the word choices you make. Now, the big question here, and I've kind of touched on it a little bit, spoilerish, I think. Why? Why does the writer set it out in that way? He could tackle the stereotype of the shop and the women and all the things he addresses by writing it normally. Why write it phonetically? It's a key thing here. Why? What do you think? Let's see. Who we got? Charlotte, what do you reckon? Why set it out that way? Oh dear. No, Charlotte's not working. Oh, I've got a more. Might be Charlotte trying to send me something telling me she's broken. Hang on. Ah. I can't speak because of my voice. Ah! Of course you can't. Okay, let's see. Eleanor, do you reckon? Why? Why set it out that way?
I'm not really sure.
Okay, why do you think?
to show that he's proud of his accent?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Well done. So what you have to think about here is that this is someone who is almost trying to reclaim what a lot of people will consider, in some ways, an offensive stereotype. That's exactly right. What he's trying to do is both, I suppose, immerse an audience in the community that he's from, with the sounds of it and that kind of thing, but really there's an element of pride. If he's saying that this stereotype does apply to him and it's nothing to be embarrassed about, then what he's doing with the accent is he's saying, well, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. He references in one of the videos, and if you haven't had time to look them out, I recommend going back to them. It's on the link I originally sent. But he references the fact that almost the Indian accent was used for a long time as almost like a comedy accent. It was almost used as a point of fun. And there's a lot of him acknowledging elements of this of the stereotype of this community, but actually saying that there's nothing wrong with those things, and there's a strong element of pride. I think that you can argue that aside from establishing character, aside from establishing like person and place, really what he's doing, when you look at it a little bit deeply, is he's acknowledging that yes, that is how people speak, yes, that is part of the stereotype, but there's nothing wrong with that, and there's a sense of pride that comes from that. Well done. Here we are. Oh, right. So you get this, so I'll leave this as a task. I imagine that you've done quite a bit of this anyway. I know that you've sent me things that you've annotated across, but this is where I would want to go with this, right? Because there's different elements to this poem. You have to almost look at, if you want, Singh, the shopkeeper, and his wife separately for a while, whereas the poem's really about their relationship, and almost their relationship is what's almost the most elegant, is what is in a lot of ways most surprising about this poem and the way that it pans out. So there are a number of references to him wanting to spend time with his wife rather than in the shop, and it's worth having an eye on which you think are the best examples of this. There's the reference to him, there's lots of references to him not really enjoying work, not really being bothered. The condition of the shop suggests that that's also true, and some of the people that pass comment on that and where it is and all the rest of it. But there's also there's references to him like shutting the shop when he shouldn't, and diving upstairs to spend time with his missus, and a couple of references to that. And I think when you start to link this back to stereotype, it starts to sort of, this is where it starts to spin on its head, because you've got the stereotype, the guy who works in his dad's shop and the shop's not, and he's got that, but actually that work and that work ethic and the money and the running of the shop and the family are a secondary concern for this person. It's getting to spend time with his wife, and he will take any opportunity that he can to do that, and that's when you really start to see the strongest examples of what the key idea in this poem is, other than addressing that stereotype. It's romantic love. I've said to you guys in the lesson when we kind of mentioned this before, I maintain this is one of, if not in lots of ways, the most romantic of the poems in this cluster. And it's unexpected. If you tell people, oh, it's a poem about that addresses the stereotypes of British Asians, you don't really expect it to be a poem about this so really passionate and romantic love, but it really is, and you've got to have one eye on that. So you're tracking the stereotype, you're tracking the ideas of romantic love, because they kind of contrast each other in a lot of ways. Have a look at the language techniques. I know lots of you have been doing with that. I pulled out this example. It's an example of obviously the phonetic writing, visharing chapati, visharing the chutney, and it's repetition. And it's used to emphasize excitement. Repetition is to do with the emphasis of what's repeated. In this case, it's we and it's share, and it's to do with its images of togetherness, of them as a couple rather than him as Singh and her as his wife, as a separate entity in a lot of ways. Now, you think about that, does it fit the stereotype that we've had established? Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's perhaps not what you would expect. The stereotype is his wife's out of sight upstairs in the shop, he's downstairs working long hours in the shop that's perhaps not the greatest shop in the world. Very, very stereotypical, but actually what the truth of this is is that he's not really bothered that nobody goes into the shop. He wants to spend all his time with his wife. And perhaps that level of romance is not a place that people automatically go to. And if you look at the tone here, you've got a tone that is sort of like excited and romantic and loving and passionate. And I wanted to make sure that when you look at this poem again, that you've picked up on that, because it's not immediately obvious when you kind of get dragged into the looking at the accent and the dialect stuff. So do have one eye on that language, and that the tone here is very positive, very passionate. Right. I wanted to draw attention that there are other voices in this poem. You'll notice that there are sections in italics. Because this is a dramatic monologue, a note worth having if you haven't got it, so it's a speech from one person. It's a dramatic monologue, the form of this poem. So if you address it as a dramatic monologue, there are other voices here, and Nagra puts them in italics, so you can see almost that they are the views of other people. Towards the end, you have the voice of the wife, and we'll tackle that. But there are other people talking, and they are the people who are talking to him in his shop about the standard of the shop and the quality of the goods that he has, and the general sort of knocked about nature of this place. And I think it's interesting to think why include those voices in that particular poem? Why put them in there? Again, to do with person, it helps us to establish Singh. It helps us to establish a shopkeeper, someone who's perhaps not that bothered. It helps us to kind of address that stereotype, you know, that it brings up elements to the stereotype that you might not necessarily know, or that you might not necessarily have made links with. I think that what he's trying to do here by putting these views in, as with anybody who deals with a strong stereotype, is what Nagra wants to do is to encourage people to confront their own view of this stereotype, to confront the stereotypes that they've got. And by putting other voices in there who are quite critical of this situation, who don't know it, they just go to the shop, which is a bit dirty, and they feel it's okay to say something to him, or he's got cheap stuff, and they think it's okay to say something to him. It's a way of pushing an audience, actually, to say that, you know, you need to be careful with stereotypes. Yes, they do apply in some cases, but there's often more to these communities than a stereotype, a lot more. And that to apply a stereotype like this minimizes people to an incredibly small dot of what they actually are. So I think that by putting them in there, what he's doing is he's almost prompting people to confront some of the views that they might have in relation to a community like this. And I think what it does is, if we apply that back to the shopkeeper, it reinforces the idea that the most important thing in his life, romantic poem, remember, is not the shop. It's not the shop. You know, it's got out-of-date food. Well, that's clearly telling us that he's not spending time checking his stock, moving things around, replenishing things. You know, it's looking a bit sort of knocked about, a bit dishevelled. It's the worst Indian shop, as it says. And so what's going on there is kind of reinforcing the idea that the shopkeeper is not spending his time doing his job, or he's not doing it properly, because he's essentially sacking it off so he can spend some time with his wife upstairs. And that's what makes it so particularly romantic. It's another way that it's being reinforced. Excuse me, quite enough. No. Hay fever. Doing this live with hay fever is a great idea. Right, so if this is a poem about stereotypes, then what you have to think about is, are those responses that he's reported with people stereotypes of a different community? And argue that they are. They're stereotypes of the white British community. He's stereotyping the white British community through the stereotype that the white British community have of the British Asian community. I expressed that very badly, but I hope you can see where I'm going with this, that he's establishing a stereotype. And in a lot of ways, you could see that these comments are his way of saying, look, stereotypes can apply to anybody. And in much the same way that all other people would go into a shop and say something quite personal and quite rude and quite, quite disrespectful to someone, is minimising them. This stereotype minimising the British Asian community too. Yeah, tackle that one. Yeah, and just to kind of sort of boil it down, really, look back at tone here as well. When he talks about the shop, there's quite a sort of rhythmical, pedestrian, everyday sort of sense to it. He feels quite bored. There's a sense of tedium. When he talks about his wife, when he talks about her, when he talks about their time together, it's a lot more enthusiastic, a lot more sort of fast-paced, a lot more sort of keen. Right, then I would have asked you to sort of point your direction of the wife and to look at these. There's a couple of details here, and I've kind of aligned this very badly on my screen. I've cut off part of it where my box and you guys are. But pick out details about his wife, and what you'll notice is that you've got very, very sharp contrasts. And there's a detail when we start to look at the wife that confuses a lot of kids, right? And it's the image of the wife upstairs on the computer, messing with the mouse while he's downstairs working. And if I got a quid for every time I've had to sort of had somebody suggest that she's cheating on him by speaking to other like dudes on the internet, then, well, I'd have enough for McDonald's. But the point is this, that's not what is going on there. The wife is a very sharp contrast between, in a lot of ways, very traditional, very stereotypical sort of Asian wife, in that she lives above the shop. Nobody really sees her. She wears a sari. Do you know what I mean? That sort of that stereotype. Again, Nagra addressing something that's part of that stereotype. But the other elements are really sort of different, really modern, really sort of what do I mean now? Not revolutionary, rebellious, really rebellious streak to it. You can see it most obviously with the parents. He's very respectful. He works in his dad's shop, a very formal relationship. But she's really rude to his mum. She's really rude to his dad. She's really disrespectful. She doesn't really care what they think. And they seem to be quite shocked by that. But that's one of the things that the shopkeeper really likes about this rebellious streak. You can see that with her haircut. It talks about her having sort of like a crew cut haircut, and I've got an image of a lady with a crew cut down there. She wears Doc Martens shoes. She's her sari, traditional sort of piece of Indian dress for women, as we've discussed, but in tartan, a really sort of gaudy, really Western pattern that you wouldn't really expect. And in a lot of ways, the wife embodies Nagra's point about the stereotypes generally, in that it is the thing that you expect in some ways, but beyond that, it's so much more. The minimising it, even down to what she does for a living, the bit that confuses people about the mouse and the computer. What she's doing is she's running like a dating site upstairs. She's got a very modern occupation that she runs on a computer. So she's not cheating on him with other guys. What she's doing is she's running that. So in much the same way that he's running like stereotypical job for Asian man, if you stick to that he works in his dad's shop, she's the opposite in a lot of ways, in that she's working at all, which is part of that stereotype, but also that she's doing something online, she's doing something that's to do with dating and romance and that kind of stuff, and also that echoes the very sort of romantic nature of kind of what's going on with Singh and his wife. They're clearly romantic people, and his wife is set up almost as being a direct contrast to him. She does wear a sari. She is, she does live above the shop. She is married to Singh, but other than that, she steps out of the stereotype massively. She's rude to the parents, which is unexpected. She's very rebellious in her behaviour. She's not what you would expect to do and what she does for a living. Her dress, her fashion sense, her hairstyle are completely not what you would expect at all, really. So I think what you have to look at is is this word at the bottom here, the last word in my little, is that like yellow box? The word subverted. We've talked about this. It's taking something that you know and features that you're familiar with and twisting them to make an opposite point. And that's exactly what Nagra does with the shopkeeper's wife. She is, in some ways, the features that you know of the Asian wife stereotype, but twisted, subverted to make a point about stereotypes and to confront people with actually what amounts to nothing more than an assumption. You know, you assume that, you know, she's sat above the shop doing nothing and twiddling her thumbs, and actually what she's doing is running her own business and, you know, and helping people sort of find love, which is something that they've done and is very, very important to them, as you'll see at the end. So the ending, we've had this big build-up of their passion and their relationship, and the way that he speaks about his wife's very positive and he's very excited to see her. It finishes with this conversation. You know, what he says, as with the rest of the poem, is in normal lettering. And then you have the conversation between them, what they say to each other is in italics. So you've got this very fun image at the end, even late at night. He's not left the shop. They're still in the shop. But instead of sat behind the counter on his stool waiting for somebody to come in and buy a newspaper, he's sat sharing the stool with his wife, and they're you know, having a cuddle, they're having a romantic moment, and they're looking out of the window at this shop, and what they can see is this sort of bright full moon. And she makes a joke. It's Nagra making a point about the stereotype of the British Asian community, the shopkeeper community, always selling things, always trying to make a quid. You know, and she sort of says to him in quite a fun way, you know, how much you charging for that? And his response is really sweet. It's really romantic. It's really affectionate. And he says it's half the cost of you. So, you know, the moon, this image of beauty. I think Romeo and Juliet, the light and beauty and darkness, and it's really sort of romantic. They sort of look at this full moon, very sort of Lady in the Tramp style figure, if you want. And they're looking at it, and it's all of it. And he's really sweet, really romantic. Says, oh, how much the moon costs? It's half as valuable as you are to me. So very, very romantic. And then she pushes him a bit forward. It's quite affectionate. It's quite playful, you know. And how much is it? Type thing. And he says, well, the moon's priceless, so you're twice as priceless. And it's really kind of sweet and romantic and lovely. And it's a really soft and really beautiful end to this poem, which in some ways has dealt with really quite heavy issues about community and stereotype and judgment in a really fun way. It's really light-hearted, it's really playful. There's lots of gentle humour at this stereotype, which arguably in a lot of ways is really offensive, as most stereotypes are. He pokes fun at it in a very gentle way, but he makes a very insightful point about it. But he's got these characters who at the end of it all are very, very much in love, and it ends in this beautiful sort of romantic image. And if you weren't clear on the nature of their relationship, you can see it mostly here. And then it's helpful if you've lost it to kind of then reverse engineer. If at the end it becomes clear that they're desperately in love and they want to be together and they're very affectionate as it is, then you can go back and you can look at things like, well, he's closing up the shop to be with her, and she's the most important thing in his life. And the way that he describes the way she's rude to the parents is really kind of like shocked but quite excited by it. It's really quite interesting. And I think the final piece of punctuation is interesting in that it's not final. It's a hyphen, it's a dash. And what does that imply about the future? Well, I guess it's open-ended. You don't have final punctuation. You don't have a terminal piece of punctuation. It's not a full stop. There's not an exclamation mark. It's a hyphen, and a hyphen's followed by the next thing. And so you're left with this really positive, really hopeful image for these two people who are very much in love, very much enjoying being together, very much enjoying their time as a married couple. And there's a sense at the end with that hyphen that there's more to come. Whether that's more of the same or they're going to go on and do other things, it's not really clear. I'd argue that it feels like they're probably going to do this for the next 40 years, but it's a really open but very positive and romantic and hopeful ending. And if you look at the poems in the cluster, there are ones that are romantic, but, you know, I think this is kind of really sweet. The other romantic ones are quite, in some ways, like quite aggressive or quite sexual in some ways, or they're about desire and longing and they're really intense, whereas this has got intense feelings, but it's all really kind of soft and lovely. It's got this really nice tone to it. It's just a lovely poem, and it ends on this lovely note that's really, really hopeful for these people. So the last two things, I kind of bodged together like some revision cards that I had kicking around on an old hard drive to kind of put on the end, just to kind of give you some kind of thinking points. I mean, for me, the box in the bottom right, I'm hoping that you can see, this is where it's about romance or romantic love. It's about fulfillment. You know, if you think about, what do you call it? I Think of Thee. That's a poem about fulfillment, in that this is about desire and longing, and at the end of that poem she's fulfilled by being in the air of this man that she's longed to be with. And in a lot of ways this has a very similar line, in that it's about the fulfillment of their relationship, the fulfillment of their love, the fulfillment that they find in each other. There's desire in there. You've got there's an image, the making love like rowing through Putney is a very, very fun way of talking about the fact that basically they're having lots of vigorous and energetic sex. It's an image of desire. It's an image of how much they can't wait to be together. Obviously, it's about marriage. Makes an interesting one, an interesting air, this one, with the Farmer's Bride. I'm fairly sure we haven't done the Farmer's Bride. Eliana, have we done it? Have we done Farmer's Bride? I kind of lose track, so I was doing it with year 11 as well.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, the clue's in the title, as always with these poems. That's a poem about marriage, but a very different view. And I think I'm giving some thought to tackling that maybe before we break up for the summer. And then obviously it's a poem about culture, because it deals with a different culture. It deals with people's attitudes to that culture. So that's kind of really what it's about. If you think about those 5 things or similar things, you'll start to see how it connects to various bits and bobs. A couple of bits of information. This is just like I said, revision card, so lots of it's repetition. But Nagra himself is from the background that the shopkeeper's from. Is the son of immigrants, so he's like first generation British Asian. His parents were directly from abroad, and they bought and ran a corner shop. It's a poem in which 2 cultures are merged: the British culture, the Doc Martens, the crew cut, the tartan sari, and Indian, the sari, the corner shop, the mentions of various sort of like Indian cuisine. And to an extent, that's kind of what's happening. The wife's a great example of that, isn't she? She's a physical representation of British and Indian cultures coming together, which for someone like Nagra, who is from that background, so he has very strong Indian heritage, he has very strong Asian sort of family links and that kind of stuff, but he's British and has been brought up here. He must feel in some ways like that himself. There's an element here about work, I guess, in that as an immigrant to this country, the shopkeeper's dad would have had to work very, very hard to get a shop at all. It references the fact that the shopkeeper runs just one of his daddy's shops. So his dad's clearly very successful and very rich and has had to work very hard, whereas the son's just being given one. So you could make a point, if you want, about his work ethic, his attitude from the shop comes from actually not having to do anything for it, just being given it. So you could argue that as a shopkeeper, he's not very good. And arguably, if I think about the shop at the top of my street, if the guy there was shutting it at like 1 o'clock to, run upstairs and have it away with his missus, then, you'd argue that possibly his priorities are different. And now, as we know, they are. I keep banging this drum. When you come across a poem, even if it's an unseen, there's always a clue in the title. The title of this is Sing Song. And Sing Song's like a play on words. It's a bit punny, if you want. Because if something's sing-song, it means it's kind of light-hearted. It has kind of like a musical, sort of like melodic quality, things that go together, like a sing-song voice, a bit like this. But it's also about, the different notes and things and melodies merging together. So maybe there's a point there. I'll also, just to direct your attention to the bit about Singh, if you didn't know. Singh is a common Sikh name. It's a name taken by all Sikh men, and it's the surname of the shopkeeper. So it's perfectly okay to refer to him as the shopkeeper or to refer to him as Singh when you're talking about him. I've tried to use narrator in my PowerPoint here, but you'll notice that when we've gone through it, I've been using Singh or the shopkeeper. All of those are fine. Just be careful that you don't confuse the poet Nagra with the shopkeeper. As much as you can see all kind of biographical through lines between Nagra and the poet, between Nagra and the shopkeeper, they're not the same person. It's a character. So just be careful there. You can also argue that Sing Song gives it a light tone. If something Sing Song, it's kind of like fun, light-hearted, childish, and it's a very light-hearted poem. As much as it deals with quite thorny issues, very, very light-hearted. As Eleanor picked up, very well done, look. The Indian stuff, the Indian dialect and the strong accent is something that occurs in a lot of Nagra's poetry, and it is exactly about that, about reclaiming that accent, because it's used as like a figure of fun, a figure of comedy, and he wanted to reclaim that. So actually, this is something to be proud of. It's a cultural heritage thing. You can look at something to his stanza length and different stanza forms. Some rhyme, some don't, some long, some short. It's all over the place in that way, and you could make a sort of really quite subtle point to the shopkeeper's emotional state. Maybe a bit of a stretch, but if you want to have a bit of a poke about in terms of structure, you'll maybe get a point there. There's lots of different points here. I think the key thing here is about the repeated chorus. You know, worst Indian shop on the worst Indian road. It gives it a song-like quality, clue in the title, but also it's repetitive. This is someone, the shopkeeper, whose life, whose day is repetitive. You open the shop, you sit in the shop, you sell some stuff, you close the shop, you have your lunch, and it's very repetitive in that sense. And his outlet, his escape, if you want, from this routine, is his relationship with his wife. And it uses rhyme and half rhyme at various different points. I've pulled out some of these, couple of key quotations. You will have highlighted some of these. I'm not suggesting that you use them necessarily. I just wanted to kind of draw your attention to a couple of language points. I kind of feel remiss if we'd not done that. If you look at the top one, the one in blue, you've got 9 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Long day. It's hard work. It's not digging a hole in the road hard, but it's long and boring and tedious, and he's clearly not having a nice time. And again, you've got that suggestion that, you know, just one of my daddy's shops. So dad's got a lot of shops. But in much the same way, when you look at Sheila in Inspector Calls, you've got mummy and daddy. You've got daddy here. This is an adult man, married man. So there's a sense that, you know, maybe he is quite childish. Maybe his dad keeps him childish. Maybe that explains why he's only been given one shop to run, but he calls his dad daddy, which for an adult man is quite odd, quite an odd language point. If you go to one down, you've got the newly bride. You've got you know, you've got him making up words. This is not someone who necessarily is completely fluent in English. Newly's not well. It is, but you don't use it in this way. So there's a point there about the English language, just a way of kind of emphasizing the heritage and the background of this person. You've got bride, bride's repeated. It's possessive, my bride. And there's a point there potentially about sort of like women and gender, but I think you'd be getting a little bit sort of like off-piste if you were kind of tackling that one. What I would say is he's not using that as a term of possessiveness. He's not using that as a term of sort of like sexual inequality. Almost it's a sense of pride. My bride. He loves her so much that he can't believe she's his, and he's so proud that he's married to her. You've also I can't see that. Okay. You've also got you know, the simile. You know, the sort of sexual reference. It's a very clear visual image. If you picture the motion of someone who is rowing, then you get a sense of what's going on. It's a very light-hearted, quite funny way of describing, you know, what they get up to together. And you've also got a reference to Putney there, which has got a slightly different meaning, but I'll leave you to make your own note. You've got the thing we talked about the internet. You know, she's playing with the mouse. You know, the wife is running her own dating website. So there's an image there about cat and mouse, you know, the pursuit of things. But, you know, you've also got images that are around sort of like beauty and feline stuff, and you can do a little bit there if you wanted to. This is an interesting one, a sort of high-level language point with sibilance. Sibilance is alliteration of the s sound. As you can see, you've got auditory imagery. That's imagery that creates a sense of sound. You know, we come down the whispering stairs and sit on my silver stool. You've got sound. So you could make a point there that it's kind of mirroring the sort of like romantic sort of whispering of the wife. Remember, they're kind of having a cuddle. It's romantic. They're looking at the moon. So there's an element there. You can make a point about the fact that he references his silver stool, that it's an image of money at a time when they're talking about money in a very romantic way, and it's quite pedestrian and everyday at a time when things are getting quite flighty and romantic. And then at the end, as we talked about, you've got repetition of baby, which is very romantic. And you've also got the images of pricelessness and of value and that kind of stuff, really. There's other things you can pick out, like the stuff about her outfit's very, very useful. The way that she speaks to parents, if you get a question about her or that's about expectations, is a very, very useful one. It's cropped up before Sing Song. I think it's 2018, one of the exams then. We got this one, the one that says 25 at the top there. Says, compare how poets present romantic love in Sing Song and in one other poem from Love and Relationships. I think that's an interesting one for you to have a think about. Maybe plan what you would do there and what you would compare it to. Maybe a bit of revision linking them together. I know you might want to have a stab at actually answering the question in short form. You could do that. But that number 25 is a genuine exam question, 2018. I'm fairly sure. But that it actually came up. That might mean it's less likely to come up on your actual real exam, because the exam board historically have not repeated named poems year after year after year. But we don't know that. We'll not find out until you've actually sat the real one next summer, so we'll just kind of persist. But that was a question on Sing Song from a couple of years ago. 27 and 28 down there are from another document that I use periodically that's just got a big list of exam questions, and I've put them on there for something to think about as well if you want to tackle it. Explore how poets present positive relationships, which is an interesting one. Quite a difficult one to kind of link it to. The one that springs to my mind is Climbing My Grandfather, and we've discussed how I feel about that one. But that's quite interesting. Letters from Yorkshire, maybe. And then present the power of love in Sing Song and one other poem. I would argue, number 28, there are some really interesting pieces to be written comparing it with The Farmer's Bride and Porphyria's Lover. I love Porphyria's Lover. I love it, love it, love it. It's my favourite poem by a country mile. I'm giving some thought to covering at least one of those two poems before we break up for the summer. But I'll put something out, and I've kind of got my head around it. All right. So that's it. That's as much as I wanted to kind of cover. I've run through some stuff. I'll make this available and push it out for you guys. Before I end this, is there anything that you wish to ask? Is there anything that you want to clarify while you're here, or am I all right to just kind of, end us now? Eliana, anything you wish to ask?
With the stereotype thing.
Yeah.
Is he going like via it and subverting it at the same time?
Yeah. So it's a deliberate choice. He's chosen to address that stereotype, right? So in some ways, lots of what he presents subscribes to like quite an old-fashioned stereotype of the British Asian community. But he's using that as a way of confronting people who hold that as a stereotype and to subvert your expectations of that community. The guy runs a shop that subscribes to the stereotype. Yes, he's got like the stereotypical Indian accent, but that's not to say that there's not more to him, that he's not romantic or vivid or passionate, which is perhaps against the stereotype. So yes, he's using it. He's using elements of it, and he's using elements of it, obviously, but he's using it for the purposes of both subverting it, certainly with the wife. She's the best example of subverting it. But also with encouraging people to kind of challenge and address their own expectations, their own views, really.
Okay.
Cool. Eleanor, anything you want to ask while you're here?
Not really, no.
Okay, well, if something crops up and you want to email me, that's absolutely fine. I'll answer it as best I can. All right, cool. That's just done then, guys. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that Charlotte's not dropped into an internet pit somewhere I've got to dig her out of. But have fun, enjoy the sunshine, and we'll catch up soon. Bye.